All right. What we're doing today, I sent you an email, probably around 11:30 or so. You will open that up. In it, you will find a student example simply titled "The Matrix," because of course that is what we're writing about. While you guys are opening that up, I'll give you a couple notes. Number one, this is their rough draft. Oh. This is their rough draft. We got 2 paragraphs here, like we've talked about a couple times now, I think. Max, this assignment is 3 paragraphs, so this is, for all intents and purposes, a fairly complete rough draft. That said, I really don't want to give you too many directions going into this. I want to see where you're at, what you think. But mostly, I want you doing this. For each paragraph, I want you, to the best of your ability, there's only 2, sum up what it is they're trying to argue. Like in a sentence, what is their argument in each paragraph? Take a couple minutes, we'll talk about it.
Wait, sum up what their argument is?
In each paragraph. Okay. Cool. All right. Well, first paragraph, what are they arguing there?
They're trying to argue that, well, they're arguing that The Matrix is an action movie and a power fantasy, but
Yeah.
it leans more into being a power fantasy than an action movie.
Yeah. So then, of course, the second paragraph, they're arguing what?
That's a good
It's power
question.
fantasy.
Yeah.
What are we not here to argue in this paper? What? No, that's what, yeah, whether you think it is or not, that's what we're arguing. What are we not arguing?
What it is and what it isn't.
What's the first paragraph about?
That it is an action movie.
What are we not here to debate?
That it is an action
Thank you. It is an action movie. There's action in it. We're not, don't do that. Just don't do it. What does that mean? We all draft how we draft. And I mean that. What that means is that it took us, meaning this student, it took us writing that first paragraph to get that second one. It took that, okay? That happens. But at some point in the process, usually early, you gotta ask yourself, am I addressing the prompt? In this case, am I arguing whether or not The Matrix is a power fantasy? Second paragraph? Yeah. First paragraph? No. Get rid of the first one. Now what that means is, it needs some love. This is a rough draft, but this is ultimately our introduction, right? We seem to feel like The Matrix is a power fantasy. Why? What are our reasons here?
Because escapism.
Good. Escape from what?
I guess.
Cool. Specifically what? We could be a little more specific than that. What about ordinary life?
Work.
Work? So what kind of work? What?
I said responsibilities,
Yeah. But like, because we all have that in different ways. Like in this movie specifically, what about his work sucks? There's probably a couple things.
It's boring.
He's what?
It's boring.
He's boring. Yeah, for sure. Damn. Anyway, because it started with somebody out there and then it really messed with my head. Yeah, it's mundane. So for a moment, we're gonna do this kind of in a reverse way we would normally do. We have the intro, right? We cut the first paragraph. We have an intro now. It needs some help. This is one of the ways we can help it. In the introduction, we give some reasons, but they're not fully fleshed out. Sometimes you got to write your way into those, okay? I agree. One of our huge themes is escapism. maybe our first body paragraph is about that. Well, then the question becomes, what are we escaping? It's this work life. There's responsibility in that. There's the fact that he seems to have little to no agency in that. All that's kind of wrapped up in it. But mostly, I think all of those fall underneath the umbrella, pardon the pun today, that is boring. It's just fucking boring. Again, we read that article, and his big point was, I can't believe this is really what undergirds the Matrix, is like, your life is boring. Oh, that sounds so terrible. Boo-hoo. That is terrible. If you worked at a place for like 10 years, 20 years, and it's just boring, that is what hell is. Hell is not spikes and fire. Hell is boring. I do wish they would stop. Anyway, to try to talk about that, because I'll put, we're escaping boring. What's a scene we might look at in a body paragraph? Where could we go in the movie, do you think?
He's in his office.
Okay, well, which part?
It is like
Good. He's in his cubicle, right? Computer off. He is literally just sitting there. That's it. On the one hand, I guess there are worse ways to get paid. But on the other, I don't know, man, it seems pretty unfulfilling. Isn't that what we mean when we say something is boring? It doesn't fulfill you. Isn't that the dream that some of you were sold when somebody told you about college? You're gonna go to classes, you're gonna work toward whatever job that's gonna like fulfill you, right? Can somebody tell me what that job is? I haven't met it yet. I went to school to be a poet. Not a lot of jobs like that. None, as it turns out. Well, a couple. You gotta know somebody. You gotta be old and alone. Anyway, so if we're gonna start with that scene, talk to me about it. He's in his cubicle, his computer's off. What are we gonna focus on? What are we gonna argue? Just pick a detail. What detail are we gonna focus on?
He's not doing work.
How do you know?
His computer's off.
His computer's off. So what? We know he's not doing work. Okay. What else can we infer from that? What could we argue is the significance of that computer being off? This is going to get tricky. We can do this.
But he doesn't really matter there in the first place.
So on the one hand, his participation seems like isn't really important, which says something about his job sort of in general, right? Which is pretty rough when it comes to a job description. You're not really necessary. You're here, but no one cares. Yeah? Okay. What about this? If we push it a little further. This is going to sound dumb. I need you to go with me on it. How do we know he's not working? See what? His computer's off. So in a way, again, we could argue, we define his activity according to his tools, right? Normally, you would think it would be the inverse, right? But we're kind of saying, again, he doesn't matter. Not just his job now. What matters in the scene? The computer monitor. If it's on, then it seems like he's working. It's got very little to do with him, even doing some of this, right? I'm sure you've all been in a class or something at some point, like, yeah, I'm working. None of that. So basically, we're undercutting the importance of who he is as a human being here. That's how we're defining boring. Okay? That ups the stakes just a little bit, doesn't it? That kind of kicks the legs out from that article we read the other day. Oh, being bored is so bad. Yeah, it is. If it undercuts your humanity, yeah. So that, I think, when we say he's escaping boredom, what have you, that's what it is. He wants to, you could say like, maybe assert his humanity. Another way to talk about this, he wants to assert his individuality, right? Is there a way we can talk about that in this scene? Not just with a computer, but where is he working? In a cubicle. Do you guys even know what that is? Yeah. My office is in a cubicle. In a dark room. With a single window. It feels a little like prison. Like cushy prison, but prison.
No, it doesn't seem that bad to me. It's your own little space, you could decorate it.
That's what silly people do. Decorate yourself. Anyway, no,
So serious people just sit there in the gray cubicle.
pretty much. That's what mine is. But no, the point is, because the one part in the scene when he looks up and he sees all the other cubicles, like he's in a cubicle in a sea of cubicles. Not unlike, it kind of recalls the scene when he unplugs, and you see all the other people in their little pods. It's a similar idea, right? You're all trapped without realizing it. Like, I think it's trying to connect that to this idea of cubicles. So that's an idea. We haven't even talked about my favorite part of the scene, though. What's the best part of that scene when he's at work? This is easy.
When he gets the package delivered to
It's
him?
the fucking phone call. First of all, he gets a phone in a package, which is strange. But then it goes off, and you're like, ooh, intrigue, right? That's exciting. First of all, getting a package at all is kind of exciting. You're like, what did I get? Ooh, it's presents, right? Then you open it, it's a phone, and then the phone goes off. Are you a spy? Isn't that what it feels like? He's talking to Morpheus, he's telling him where to go, he's skulking around. He goes outside the window and hugs it. He's being chased. If that's not escaping boredom, I don't know what is. Right? But here's what's interesting about that, okay? Basically what I wanted to show you is, even in this one scene, you have two distinct possibilities, okay? On the one hand, I think you have this argument. And all we're considering, this is a paragraph all on its own, is basically how the scene opens. He's in his cubicle by himself, his computer is off. There's plenty to talk about just there, okay? Then if you watch the rest of the scene, now what we're actually talking about, you guys pointed out the package / phone, and I'm going to sum all that up as spy ship. Because that's what it is. Here's a question for you. And it's not about the Matrix, but it's related to our discussion. First of all, do you think it's fair to describe Neo's activities in the second half of that scene where he's like bouncing between cubicles and he, again, ends up on the side of the building? Up until he wimps out at the end. He does. I would too. I'm not. But do you think it's fair to characterize that as spy shit? I think so, yeah. Okay, well, my follow-up question is, why? How do you know that that is spy shit? The going between cubicles, the being on the phone, the like.
It's the kind of thing you see in like spy movies.
It's the kind of thing we see in spy movies. Probably not what spies really do. We don't know what spies really do. That's kind of the point. You know? So it's interesting here to bring it full circle. On the one hand, what is he escaping? Boredom. Crushing boredom. What does that really mean? If you are ultimately bored, You are not able to assert your humanity, your individuality. You've been robbed of your personhood. That's what it is to be truly bored, right? Think about it for a second. When you've been the most bored you've ever been in your life, isn't part of the issue that you don't even have thoughts so much? What are you as a person if not your thoughts? That's how the scene opens. How the scene ends. He interacts with Morpheus, which enables him to escape boredom. He seems pretty excited, right? This is fun. But, slight counterpoint to that, is he asserting his humanity? Is he asserting his humanity in this moment? I would say no, right up until he wimps out. That is him asserting his humanity. For every moment, after he gets the phone, right up until he's on the side of the building and he goes, nah. That's just him doing like his best James Bond impression. Right? That's not being an individual. That's just enacting stereotypical assumptions. And if you guys have come with me this far, no one has disputed my idea, so I'm going to assume that you're at least somewhere on board. What might it suggest that when he escapes boredom, seeking to assert his humanity, his individuality, he instead sort of mimics spy ship? What does it say about his attempt at escape, maybe? Do what? You said he's successful. Is that what you said? I can't hear you. Do you think he is? If so, why? Because like literally he doesn't escape, right? He gets caught there. He escapes later. More on that maybe in a minute. Does he assert his humanity, his individuality in this moment? Where he's like ducking between cubicles and... Because he's definitely not bored, seems like.
He's not bored, but he's also still being told like what to do.
He is, isn't he? He's being directed. Now before, his boss was telling him what to do. This boss seems way cooler, way nicer, Morpheus. But he's also very clearly telling him what to do, where to go, and when. Right? So now, I'm kind of wondering if escaping boredom is enough. The movie seems to suggest no. That, again, to cut the legs out a little bit from that article we read, I don't know that it's just about work sucks, right? I don't know that it's just about boredom. Because he's not bored here. This is cool. This is exciting. But he's still being directed, just by a different guy. Except when he's not. He says no at the end, allows himself to get caught. Is that the moment where he asserts his individuality, do you think? We talked about this before. Not everyone thought so I'm just curious. Does he assert his humanity when he's kind of on the side of that building and I think he says like, this is crazy or I can't do this or something, and he goes back inside. And then the next scene you see him being let out by the agents.
He dropped the phone while he was on like
True.
the side of the building, right?
True, yeah.
And like, was Morpheus still on? I forgot. Was Morpheus like still on the phone?
He's hung up. He hangs up.
He hung up.
He tells him basically, do this or don't. If you don't, they'll take you. And then he hangs up.
Yeah, I think he said his humanity.
In that one moment where he's caught.
Huh?
You said you feel like he asserts his humanity
Yeah, like when he said no, like he didn't want to do it, but I felt like it was more like when the phone fell. It's kind of like, because Morpheus was still like there kind of guiding him. But
Is
like,
it
not
even
really.
in spirit? Like,
Yeah.
maybe. I mean, because he walks all around the building and then he drops the phone and then he decides he can't do it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. Huh. Well, there's two possibilities there. What we're saying now is, we've lost the director. Because he literally loses the phone, right? I guess you could say Morpheus could call him back or something, right? And tell him what to do. There's two possibilities that present themselves here. Number one, he loses the director, which you're kind of saying enables him to assert his individuality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, for sure. But again, what's interesting is, if we go according to that logic, he asserts his individuality here, and then what happens? He gets arrested. You're very much not an individual when you're under arrest. Shit.
Yeah, he did.
True. So, very good. So now what we're kind of saying is, I guess I'm adding an addendum to this point. I'm kind of wondering, almost if you could put like a time stamp or a time limit on how long he's an individual in this scene. He goes from being directed to not directed to directed again, right? So yeah, it's like it's moments. They're probably in that office by the time he gets back to the window. Do you know what I mean? So the length of time it takes him to scoot back around, he's an individual, I guess. Why bring any of that up? Well, because we started this by thinking about whether or not this is a power fantasy, right? If you just had this, I think the hard answer would have to be yes. Because he escapes this. Right? He does. Both in the scene, momentarily, and then later on, hardcore. Like he gets flushed, like he escapes. But this whole mechanism shows up again later. I'll come to it. This is Cypher's argument when he's talking about Morpheus. His point is, if he told us what this world was like, we wouldn't have come, right? We would have stayed. And he says something else about how we just traded this for Morpheus telling us what to do. He's not wrong. That complicates the idea of it being a fantasy. There's some really cool aspects that you're like, absolutely, this is a power fantasy. But on the other hand, and then I'll come to you. On the other hand is, when you dig into some of it, man, I don't know how fantasy this stuff is. Some of it seems kind of terrible. The idea of shrugging off whatever this is, like this is security, right? Again, boring is safe. If you were the boring friend in high school, you were also the guy that like never lit anything on fire. Yeah, that's gonna be loud. One assumes.
Huh?
That was real bright. I got a couple people's attention. Far away then. That's nice at least. Anyway, I'm sorry. I said we would come to you.
So this is a little off topic.
Okay.
But you also argued that like Neo kind of stops being an individual the second he gets to his job, because like when he's not at his job, he's like super cool hacker dude.
Yeah.
Hacking stuff. And then when he is, he's just not doing shit. It's just kind of like like sitting around.
Yeah. So maybe, and that, I guess that kind of works in what they're saying. So maybe part of the power fantasy in this case is that this boring life isn't even maybe, I mean, it's something that needs to be escaped, but part of how he escapes is he wears it as a mask, right? Like almost like the hacker self is his Batman or his Superman, and this is his Clark Kent, you know, his Bruce Wayne. Those guys, comparatively, are boring. Superman and Batman kick ass, so like that's... Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. I don't know what I think about that. Yeah? Possibly. So how would you organize any of that information if we're going to take what you're giving us? I think you would still talk about this in its own paragraph. And then I think you would have another paragraph where you say, you know, but here's another scene where we get to look at his hacker life and how cool it is or how individualized it is, right? Do we get a scene like that? Because we don't actually get a lot of hacker stuff. It's just kind of gestured at, you know? We have a couple, though. Can you guys remember? That's all early in the movie. It may actually be hard for you to summon. These hacking scenes.
The very beginning of the movie,
Okay.
like Trinity doing.
When she approaches him in the nightclub?
Oh no, like wasn't she like on a computer before like the agents found her, like in the very beginning of the movie?
Yeah. Okay. Is she talking to him then? I don't know. I think she's, I mean, I think they're looking for him, but now I can't remember what she's doing actually in that scene. Which is funny because it's almost not nearly as important as all the like flipping, right?
You probably like need to rewatch the movie.
I need to rewatch that first scene all of a sudden. But again, I think we get a couple looks at Neo being his hacker self. When you said beginning of the movie, I thought you were talking about like, I mean, there's a couple moments. So for instance, we know he's a hacker when those...
Yeah, when those dudes show up.
Those like vampire guys?
Yeah, he sells them a couple of Nintendo 64 cartridges.
Something, yeah. Hey, cool, this is Pilot Wings, check it out. No, but
This is Mario 64.
yeah. He sells them something digital, right? That's really all that matters. And well, here's an interesting question. Compared to Neo, specifically at work, because we're saying that's the not individual guy, right? He elects to go with these people I'm pejoratively terming vampires. So they're the individuals, right? Are they? They're definitely not this guy, right? Are they individuals? These vampire folks. You're going with what?
I said, well, technically, no.
Why not?
Yeah, are they?
Nobody's living their own life.
Yeah, are they just data, or are they like other people in the Matrix?
Oh, I mean, in the grand scheme, yeah, there are people in the Matrix for sure. But I just meant we can still treat them as people, you know, in that context. Are they individuals? These folks, this group of vampires. How do they dress? How do they act?
They all dress the same.
They do.
So what if like they're not individuals? Maybe like, you know how I said earlier, like maybe Neo stops being an individual when he walks into work.
Yeah.
What if it's different for everyone else?
What do you mean?
I don't know. So like the vampire dudes do their thing, and that's just what they do.
Yeah.
And that's when they're not individuals.
Well, I mean, logic would dictate most of them probably have jobs of some sort. I mean, it may not quite be what this guy does, but it's, you know, another version of it. But the point I'm making here is, we were kind of saying, well, nighttime when you're off the clock, that's when you can be an individual. He does his hacker thing, and I'm like, maybe. But the film at least suggests that for part of that time as well, like he's rolling with the vampire crew, you get to see people in their off time. They kind of seem all the same too, right? It's like a dude with bleach blonde hair, and then two girls that are like meant to be suggestive, and like we're all gonna hang out and be wild, man, but we're gonna be wild together in the same way, right? So it's kind of, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Again, it calls into question that fantasy of like, when can you assert your humanity? He does it on the window. He might do it in the nightclub when he talks to Trinity, I guess. Because she's like talking to him and he's talking to her just like as a dude. So I guess you could say that's him being himself there, talking to a woman. For some people, that's a fantasy. As sad as that is to say out loud. Just talking to a woman is like some next level shit, you know? So what does all this do to the idea that this is a power fantasy? Because again, on the one hand, I think the film wants to tell us you can escape. You can become this thing. And like, that's really cool. It's really fantastic, right? In the way we used that word last time. But on the flip side, how possible does it make it seem, I guess? You know? Because the road for him is easy. We talked about that too. He's chosen one. He's kind of plugs in and learns whatever he wants. Like, you know, he barely does anything in the movie, if we're being completely honest. It just ends up by the end kicking ass. But how possible is that road? You know? All right, this is the last point we have to talk about. Maybe it'll stop raining by the time we're done. What do you do with this whole chosen one narrative anyway? We talked about this maybe the class before last, so I guess a week ago. A lot of the time, the power fantasy comes down to somehow being the chosen one, right? Again, even in Rocky, everybody around him, right? They're all waiting on their shot. Isn't that just a way to talk about being chosen? You get your shot. By that logic, they're kind of saying, I just haven't been chosen yet. You know? I haven't got my shot yet. Are all power fantasies like that? Chosen one stuff?
Yeah, and a lot of them I've seen.
I think so. Well, then the question is, how plausible is that to be the one, which is what we call him in this? Because, like, he's the one out of, like, how many do you figure?
At least a couple of billion.
A couple billion. That's slim odds. That's pretty slim odds. So it's not super plausible, this fantasy. Really sweet gig if you can get it, but it's unlikely, we'll say. Then why do we, the pushback to that would be, because I work real hard to give you guys every side to an argument, okay? The pushback to that would be, why do we keep buying it? All these movies, I think, in one way, shape, or form, sell us on this chosen one idea, you know? So something about it, we're just like, oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that could be me. Somehow. Why do you think that is? What's up? What did he say? Optimism. Just blind faith? Hope? Maybe. That's got to be part of it. The hope that it could be you. That it's possible for you. Which, of course, logically says that, sorry about these other folks, but maybe. Why do you think we operate like that? I'm not disputing it. But it's interesting when you put it in those terms, right? Why do we have this hope, do you think? As like a, I don't know, as a people. Oh, this is fun. When my hair gets wet, it's like modeling clay. We could really have a lot of.
You makes me matter.
Okay. To be clear, you're saying we hope we matter,
Yeah.
which implies we worry we don't.
Yeah.
I guess one question I would have to that is, do we only matter if we sort of reach that mountaintop? Is that how it works? I'm honestly asking.
For some people.
Yeah. Well, because we're kind of talking about what, like, power in this case gets equated to like fame or something, right? Like notoriety. If people don't know about you, I mean, you're not powerful, right? And if you're powerful, people know about you. Yeah. Well, this is starting to sound an awful lot like we're getting into like a class discussion, right? Not class, but like
No, class
class.
versus class.
Yeah. Like I grew up with a rat tail. I came from a particular class. If you don't know what that is, consider yourself lucky. It's just what it sounds like, though. It's disturbing. Anyway. The hell does this have to do with class? Power fantasy? I thought we just wanted to be cool. Neo is middle class in the movie. John McClane is lower middle class. Rocky is low class, you know. And they all sort of ascend in the film, right? Like that, no matter what, seems to be the fantasy. You start here, you end up here. And we're just along for the ride. That's the fun part, is watching the ascension. Movie cuts out right about the time they get to the top, right? So what are we saying we hope for, do you think? Ultimately, when we talk about power fantasy. I don't think we're hoping we're going to fly. Literally, like Neo does, right? What do we hope for ourselves, do you think? What's up? Well, of society. How do we define that? Okay. Financially. Do what? So security again. That's a little boring. I just wonder, again, if some of what we're getting at, I'm trying to bring this all full circle. I understand this has been a wide-ranging discussion. Sounds like you're really coming down now, too. Power, at least in the case of The Matrix, but I also think power in Rocky, and I also think power in Die Hard. And those are three kind of different movies on some level. Power, like we're talking about it, is the power to be an individual, right? To be yourself. Not let other people define you or your actions, right? That's power. Rocky doesn't have it at the start of the movie. They tried to take it from John McClane, and Neo doesn't have it at the start of the movie. So they defend that, or they take it back, or they get it somehow, right? So that's what success is being able to assert your individuality. But again, in The Matrix, that's trickier than it is in Rocky, than it is in Die Hard, I think. It seems to suggest, on one hand, it's possible, but on the other hand, it's fleeting. Unless you're like the one, I guess. But the important thing about the one, and I'll end on this, he's the one because he gets to break the rules that we all have to live by. I think that's important. Like, how does he ultimately assert his individuality? He doesn't have to live like anybody else, you know? That does something to that question of power fantasy as well. Questions or thoughts about any of that? I sort of unintentionally threw a lot at you, so I apologize. Okay. To bring it back to a practical application, and then I guess we'll all just swim home. Again, what we got in this rough draft started that whole discussion, by the way. Now, I spun off a lot of times. Sometimes I can't help myself. But you guys worked with me too. Like, you were right there with me. This gave us that. It even gave us, I want to say, a little bit of specifics, right? Talking about him being a hacker, being at work. An office worker who sits at a computer all day when not at work, he's a hacker. So already they have one or two scenes they could think about if they wanted to, right? So they know what kind of paragraphs they're going to start to maybe write. The trick would be now to write them. But that's what we're looking to do in this paper. How good a job does the Matrix do as a power fantasy? I've been pushing you guys pretty hard to at least consider that it's not strictly a yes and not strictly a no. I do think it's a little bit of both. But there's all kinds of ways to get there. Thoughts on that?
When we write this,
Yes.
well, I guess that would be a yes to my question, since you said it's not strictly a yes and it's not strictly a no, that we can include like counterpoints.
Sure.
If our first one we want to say like,
Yeah.
it is, and then the other one we could say like why people would assume that that same reason is a not.
Possibly. I mean, I would still, when it comes, that's fine on the one hand, yes. On the other, you would have to figure out a way to reconcile that in your thesis. So, like, are you thinking of specific?
No, not really. It's just that like with this one,
Okay.
like his just kind of says it is, but then with like all of our examples, it's kind of like really it's not. So
It is and it
that
isn't.
didn't work.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I guess if you were going to try to do that, I mean, the way I always talk about theses is on all those statements, right? Although the film, encourages although this, and by the way, if you're going to have a thesis like this, you have to explain what you mean by this beforehand. In this case, it is right? It does suggest that, okay? So although that, it also suggests that such an escape is ultimately fleeting, momentary. You can be powerful. You can be an individual. You cannot be dictated to, but only occasionally. You got to pick your spots. It's not something you get to do all the time. In a way, I kind of wonder if that's super realistic, actually. You know? Because, like, here's an interesting thought. Rocky, of the three movies we saw, I guess, is the most realistic. Right? And it's because he loses. If he beats Apollo Creed, that movie's fucking ridiculous. It just is. It's probably still fun, but it's just fun, right? It's not, there's no, it loses the heart, I think, in that film if he beats Apollo. But it's also, if you lean on it at all, still pretty unrealistic, actually. He goes 15 rounds with Apollo Creed. Heavyweight champion of the world. He barely beats a guy named Spider Rico at the start of the movie. I know he trains real hard for, I think it's 5 weeks. But I mean, I don't know, man. I don't know that that's terribly realistic, actually. I think more likely, according to the argument we're getting from the Matrix now, he would step into the ring, he would feel really good about himself, he had worked as hard as he could, he asserted himself in that moment, right? And as soon as the bell goes off, he's on the canvas, he doesn't know what happened, he's back to being who Apollo just decided he was going to be, which is out cold. Isn't that probably more realistic? All I'm saying is, to answer your question, but in a way bigger way than you imagine, and I apologize, is even when we're saying it's power fantasy, but it's also kind of not, really what we're saying is it defines what a power fantasy should be in this particular case. The way I'm spinning it is, I think this is more realistic. I'll come to you. But another way to spin it would be, rather than saying this is realistic, where the hell did I? Oh. So escape is ultimately fleeting. So I'm saying that's a realistic power fantasy. Another way to spin that is something like, what's the word I want? All right. I want to think of a word, so I don't want you to forget what you were going to say. Did you have a question or did you have a thought?
I guess it's kind of like a thought.
Okay.
Or so.
Sure.
So like, we keep saying like relatable and like.
Sure.
We keep saying like how real is it? How real do we do that? Like,
Yeah.
can society obtain that?
Yeah.
And I thought like for me, like when I think of power fantasy, I thought the point was just kind of like we look at something that we can't obtain. Like, what was it that you said? You said like
suspension of disbelief?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're basically saying that like
You can live in it or something.
yeah, or like I don't know. I think power fantasies are more so like we not relate to them. We're like we like them or we view ourselves in them because it's not possible.
For sure.
It's like this is the only chance that it'll ever happen.
Is watching it.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to. Okay. Sure. Okay. Well, that kind of. So, the other point I was going to. This is the word I couldn't think of. Thought of it while you were speaking. Is that's not fulfilling. Doesn't make us feel good. According to that line of logic, either one of these would work, by the way. But according to this line of logic, it kind of ties into what you're saying, which is, well, according to that definition of power fantasy, that doesn't work at all. I'm not here for realism, boss. I'm here for fantasy. Sure. Yeah. I think either one works. But again, the point is they can't work together because those are two very different things. But it's an argument. You have to speak to that. Why, for instance, if we think The Matrix is not terribly fulfilling in its depiction of a power fantasy, and you want to look at scenes and talk about specific details as to why doesn't that work as a power fantasy? You just kind of put it really well. I hope you wrote some of that down. But this idea that we watch these movies because they're fucking movies. Most of the time when you see a film, it's not because, hey man, this is just like your life. It was like, I live that. I don't need that. Right? Sure. If Iron Man just like went to class every day, hung out with his friends and had pizza every night, and woke up hungover, like about 20 minutes in, you're leaving that movie. You're like, at what point does he like pew pew? Like, I need some. Yeah, for sure. It's just on the flip side, for someone who's more cynical, I'm gonna be honest with you, I like the fact when something disappoints me. I know. So for me, the perfect power fantasy is like one that reminds you of how like futile your life is in some sense. I dig that. I don't know what's wrong with me. Cool. That was very smart. I appreciate that. Did that make sense to everyone else? Because she and I just kind of talked for a second. Okay. In the best case scenario, you'll arrive at something like this. More importantly, something like this. Where you don't just, again, tell me how good a job, because that is the question. How good a job does the Matrix do as a power fantasy? Because part of your explanation of your answer has got to be your definition of what a power fantasy should be or what it's supposed to do, right? And that's that part. Sound good? Okay. Not all of you take notes. I don't understand it. I don't pretend to understand it. Maybe you have great memories. For next time, the final draft is due. That'll be on Turnitin. Remember, it's only 2 to 3 paragraphs. It's not a big deal. But that said, I would like to caution you against like telling yourself that repeatedly. Do you know what I mean? It's not a big deal. I'll just do it Monday morning. I mean, you could, or you could like write it tonight and sleep on it, and then look at it Saturday and be like, oh, I need to fix this, or oh, I have a better idea. You know, like give yourself some time. Go nuts. I don't know. Anyway, that's due Monday. Also, we're going to talk about your final project. People always freak out because it's called final project. It makes it sound very official. It's not. The way I sum it up is like this, because I build all my classes in the same way. So my comp students are doing this right now too. They're like, what's the final project? I give you your final papers early. Like I have you turn them in early, okay? Because to me, here in about a month when the semester is winding down and all your actual final shit is due, your life is usually on fire, right? Like that's how it feels. So I say we get our big thing out of the way now-ish. And then we have a project which I'm asking you to do work, I'm asking you to think, but it's not as intense, right? So you're still participating in the class, but I kind of feel like as much as I can, I give you a little bit of a breather. So your life is slightly less on fire. That's the goal with the project. So you need to do it, you take it seriously, but it's not worth freaking out about. Anyway, we'll talk about it on Monday. Thank you guys.